Welcome into the Bobby Carpenter Show here on the Big Play Network. Buckeyes sitting at 10-0 now, 2 games remaining with a 38-3 victory over the Michigan State Spartans on Saturday night. 7:30 kick. Weather was pretty good. A little bit chilly in the air, Schlegs, but it finally felt like fall. Maybe there weren't all of the stars that were out, and you could tell that Ryan Day was trying to get some young guys in there. But man, it was exciting to see Ohio State go out there and really play a complete game and look pretty good on both sides of the football.
You know, you're absolutely right, Bob. And that's what we talked about last week. We talked about, hey, listen, man, just go out there and absolutely dominate their face off. And that's what they did from the jump. One of the things that really stood out, besides the fact, like in this game, and again, you and I are former players, we like watching the players. You get Emeka back, you get Stover back, you get Burke back. Tommy's obviously out. Ransom was out. I believe Proctor was out. Am I right on that, Bob?
Yes. Yeah. Tommy.
Yep, so he was
Tommy, Lathan, and Proctor all out.
Yep.
So 3 guys in the back 7 were down.
Yep. And so they started really fast. And again, what caught my eye? That end around with Marvin. And again, it's just play design. It's what they're starting to do, these little wrinkles that they're just sprinkling in throughout the year. And again, getting your best guys the ball in critical situations. And obviously we're pushing Marvin 100% because he's the best player in college football. But on that particular play, they had Stover lined up a little wider out of a 2-point stance. Guy Scott was inside of him, and they ran almost like it was a counter. He came down, Guy Scott came down, pivoted back around, end around with Marvin. Stover sets the edge, and then Guy Scott got the kick out. I thought it was an awesome play design, but it's just something now. It's like, where is Marvin? How are they utilizing? But simultaneously, it's the same stuff that they could also run with Emeka or Xavier and still give the ball to Trevion. So like as a defense, and we'll talk about this later, why is it so critical to know what you're playing, right? Like we know what they're doing. That's a very difficult play for all things because you have counter this way, you have run to the opposite side, and then you also have the threat of pass out of it with key guys. So, I mean, just the design that they're getting and getting their playmakers the ball was really fun to watch. For them to jump out 21-0, I was like, man, these guys are rolling. And they end up 38-3. Second half was a little bit what you kind of expect, just kind of a pump in the brakes, getting guys some rest, but they did the job that they needed to do.
Yeah, I thought they did a fantastic job. And you mentioned that play, little end around to Marvin. Marvin had a huge, epic night. 7 for 149, almost $150. I believe he's tied now with the lead, or maybe in the lead by himself for the most 100-yard games by Ohio State wide receiver.
It's awesome.
With a couple games obviously left in the regular season, hopefully Big Ten championship, CFP, and everything else. A couple touchdowns through the air. And then obviously you mentioned the little end around reverse touchdown that he got. And, the creativity, the play design, number of running backs were touching the ball. You had Xavier Johnson out there, utilizing him, the X factor in a bunch of different ways. He had 4 carries, Chip train him as well. And then, what was great to see, and this is one of the things that we can kind of touch on, I thought Malik Hartford played well.
Yeah.
He looked good. Some of the young linebackers, when they got in there, those guys looked pretty darn good. Filling up gaps and doing a good job. There wasn't much of a drop, if any, when those guys came in. Looked pretty good, but it felt like they were trying to really feature Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yes.
It's a night game. It's prime time. Everybody's watching, Penn State and Michigan earlier in the day. Ohio State's the other side of that coin in the Big Ten. So everyone's flipped it on at night. You want to lock in and see what's happening. The Georgia Ole Miss game's getting away. I mean, there wasn't really a fantastic game on, to tell you the truth. And so you're seeing this and you're looking at these gaudy stats by Marvin Harrison, all these great plays. And so it felt like they're trying to keep him in that Heisman conversation. And I thought they did a pretty good job of it as well.
Yeah, think about this, man. You got Daniels, who had an unbelievable epic night himself. You have Penix Jr., you got obviously Marvin, you got Bo Nix, you got other guys that are in the mix there, but he's 100% the best guy on the field for your team. You have to feature him. But as you feature him, you're also setting up for others guys. And we saw that with like Stover coming back, looking more like himself. And we saw a couple of games where he didn't even get targeted.
Yeah.
Why? Because first off, the dude's a battler, man. I mean, him and Tommy, like they're just tough dudes, guys you want to root for. And he comes out, he goes 7 for 79 and a touchdown. But even his blocking, it just is his leadership on the field, really resonates with people. And then to your point, defensively, only giving up 182 yards. They had 6 TFLs. And I know we don't get a ton of sacks. They had 2 sacks. but TFLs are big. And there was that one, I believe it was Hancock came up, read it. It was a quarterback run to their right. He read it. He spilled it. Boom. And then Burke came up, got a tackle for a loss, and they ended up missing that long 56, 58-yard field goal right at the beginning of the game, man. And then now the offense is a short field. Boom, you go down and you punch it in. That's great complementary defense. The guys just playing really, really fast, so it's really fun to watch.
It was fun to see that. It was fun to see them start fast, like you said as well. Schlegs,
Yes.
3 possessions to start the game, 3 touchdowns.
Yeah.
You did a good job. And that's exactly how that game should have went. It was 35-3,
Yes.
I believe, at halftime.
Yes, it
It
was.
took the air out of the football in the second half. You get a field goal, okay, no big deal. But you didn't need to go try to press it. Didn't need to score 70. They've got Harlan Barnett as their interim coach. I mean, it's a mess up there at Michigan State. Everybody knows that. Everybody understands it. And I think that's Ryan Day being like, hey, we're going to feed the dogs. And when the dogs are fed, Schlegs, let them go back to the porch. Let them sit there, let them rest, keep them healthy. You've got one more left. You've got senior day coming up. So you wanted to get some of those feature guys out there. And how about this? Lincoln Keenholz out there running around. We finally got a chance to see him. Like, well, who's the next guy after Devin Brown? Well, there's Link. And you got a chance to see him, and you saw some of that athleticism, saw him moving around, threw some pretty good balls, and it was exciting to potentially see what the future could look like.
Yeah, I mean, first off, being able to watch him for the first time, that's great. Big athletic kid. I played multiple sports in high school. I think he was the player of the year, Gatorade player of the year. So, I mean, you have talent back there, but this is the type of game where you can get some of those guys some playing time. CJ Hicks and some of the linebackers, like you said, to some of the DBs, is they need live experience. And I think the one thing that our staff, and we've been pounding the table for them, and I'm really proud of the way our staff has developed guys, because the stage is not too big for them and you continually have to develop them. And you have to feed them a little bit, right? Like every week we develop you at practice. The games are reserved for going and winning the game. However, in a situation like this, here's a little bone for you. Now go out there and show us what you can do, because we've seen that practice. Now let's see it on game film.
Absolutely. So we've got a lot of stuff right here for you, Schlegs. Pretty exciting show as always. Go around the top stories in college football, how that all looks. What this week's game against Minnesota could potentially look like. The kick time has been revealed for that as well. So we'll give you that information, when that's going to be. It's a senior day event. That's great. And then as always, we've got the questions from our listeners, the real talk. You're going to love to get a chance to hear that and answer some of the questions, the pressing issues that you want to know about. We'll give you all the information, all the news and notes. That's all coming to you right here on the Bobby Carpenter Show on the Big Play Network. All right, welcome back into the show as we talk a little bit about Ohio State and their demolishing of the Michigan State Spartans on Saturday night, 38-3. Game never really felt that close, Schlegs, but it wasn't the only game going on this weekend in college football. There was another huge game in the Big Ten going on as well, a game where their head coach was not permitted to be on the sidelines, a game that took place in Happy Valley between the other two top teams in the Big Ten East and in the Big Ten in general. You had Michigan downing Penn State 24-15. Jim Harbaugh's suspension comes down while his team is flying in the air to Happy Valley. He is made aware when they land, or maybe in the air, that he would not be able to be on the sideline. They tried to get, an injunction, a temporary restraining order on obviously that ruling. They could not get that done. Apparently that'll be held, sometime throughout this week. I was hearing Friday, but we'll see, how that goes. You got the coordinator sobbing after the game, crying as if Jim Harbaugh died. There was just a lot there. You felt like Penn State had a chance to win this game. They just couldn't produce any big plays, Schlegs. And like when it came down to it, like James Franklin, his defense was getting it done. Offense couldn't do it. It felt like they maybe panicked a little bit late in choosing to go for it, when maybe they could have punted one more time and see if their defense could have helped them out.
Yeah. All right. So just that game in general, before we get to the other things, McCarthy 7 for 8 for 60 yards. I mean, he only had to throw it when he had to throw it. And
I don't think they threw in the second half at all, by the way.
Well, that's what happens when you rush for 227 and you own time possession. But it also goes back to the same reason why Ohio State was successful against Penn State, and that was Drew Aller. Again, he's a freshman. He only had 70 yards on 11 completions for 3.2 average. Like, you can't beat a Michigan when you don't have any vertical threats. And you got to be able to push the ball downfield. They have a really good running game. They have a great defense. Michigan also has a great defense. So in order to beat a great team, you got to push the ball vertical. And they're just not able to do that. And that's really the difference in Penn State this year. And now, consequently, they fired their offensive coordinator right after this game. So there's a lot of moving parts. 24-15, Ohio State, 20-12. Are there really comparisons? Here are the comparisons. You got two great teams that are matching up in 2 weeks, but most importantly, you can't overlook that we have Minnesota. We'll talk about that later. But that's kind of my takeaway from it. I don't think Penn State really tried to win the game, because if they did, they would have put it on all their shoulders more to go win the football game, as opposed to kind of being scared, not scared, but like, should just punt it, let our defense do their job because they're the best part of our team.
They are. And they made Aller made some mistakes at the end. I mean, they tried to kind of open it up a little bit. They tightened it. I don't know why he went for 2 earlier in the game, and then obviously had to go for 2 later. It felt like James Franklin was in his head a little bit. Schlegs didn't even see the fact that he had fired Yursich. So obviously there's a lot of issues there, but it seems like he is chasing a little bit with what he's trying to get done, and everything's in his head. So we'll put that game to rest. I thought they looked about the same as Ohio State did against Penn State. Maybe Ohio State, maybe a little more impressive on the offensive side. But it was also at home as opposed to being on the road. So we're shaping up for a nice matchup here in a couple of weeks. But I mean, just a whole charade, Schlegs, of getting into this. And I want to get into this with you because you're a guy who's been through some things, as far as NCAA investigations while you were coaching, stuff that happened. And there was a lot of stuff there. And when you've seen what's transpired the last couple of weeks about the sign stealing, the Connor Stallions being on the sidelines, people from Michigan that I've seen, like, no one's ever said it didn't happen. They've just tried to justify it and say that everybody does it, or the fact that Jim Harbaugh didn't know about it, or it isn't a big advantage, which it is a big advantage if it's done well and done correctly, which I believe it was. So your experiences, your thoughts, we really haven't dove into this as much as we should have in prior shows. So I want to kind of unpack it now since the suspension has been rendered.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. So, I mean, obviously I was involved when Trez had the thing and tattoos here. And I thought it was, great man who cared about his kids. And did he really need to be forthright with the NCAA when there was a federal investigation and he was privy to, and he was trying to protect his kids from that? And though he lied or though he misinterpreted his information, that's kind of regardless, but there's a penalty for it. Right. And again, I just thought I wanted things to play out. Okay. Then you had Urban's suspension and things that went on in the staff, but he was held responsible for those things. And I also wish that there was more due process in that. And then when I look at this, there's a lot of things that unfold here. So first off, you have, a coordinator that is fired because of, potential computer access crimes is still an ongoing investigation. You have somebody
FBI investigation, by the way.
FBI. You had somebody that was also let go because of potential sexual activity with a minor. You had somebody that resigned because of social media accounts, and you have this that comes out. And this is the thing that people don't understand. And again, here I am. I'm saying this right now. I want due process. Like, I want all the things to be laid out on the table so that the punishment fits the crime, not just hearsay or people's emotions. I want it all out on the table so they can make a ruling and let it be known. Because if it is this egregious at what it looks like to me, then it needs to be some more significant than what it is. But let's just think about this, okay? So besides the fact that there's Central Michigan has not come out that was him or not, right? Which is crazy because
like their lack of ability to produce another person basically implies that's who it said it was. Because how do you not know who's on your sideline? It's been 10 days now since those accusations were levied.
Right. And so if you just look at the totality of what it is, now I want everybody out there to understand there's a difference when you're in game or when you're watching film, or I'm watching a team, right? And I'm getting like, when the quarterback did this signal to his wide receivers, what did he say? I'm talking to that guy. He's telling me we get so many tips just from watching film. We've seen Cade Stover go over and touch the tackle's hip, and somebody tweeted out, it's 16 run to 4 pass. That's a key for me. I still have to play my eyes. I still have to trust my eyes, but I'm going to put myself in a situation where I know that's a heavy run tendency. Doesn't mean I know it's run. It's 16 to 4, but I'm going to play it as such, right? Hey, if they check out of something and we go like this, and that's Tampa 2, or we go just straight 2, that's a difference, because Tampa 2, the Mike has to go carry 3 vertical because our safeties are now playing high and wide. The offense is thinking about that, right? So I will communicate. I would go out and talk to other people that played people and say, what did they say when they did this? All right, now in the game, I'm going to recognize that, but I still have to go through alignment, assignment, alerts, and adjustments. I still don't know. I'm just trying to put myself in the best scenario for me to go make a play and for my team to go make a play. That's what we all do. That's why we all watch film and talk. Okay, that's different. That is different than going, again, the rule is you're not allowed to go advanced scout. Also not allowed to go record the signs of other people. And I guarantee you this is how it happened. Because if I was doing it, this is how I would do it. I would look at the down and distance on the Jumbotron. I would then look at the signals. They can correlate those signals to the play that transpired. Then I could figure out who the live person was based on those signals and what play was ran for an entire game. You take it out through the summation. You can also find how did they tweak it. Now, when you go and you take that to the field and there's 3 different people in different colors, are you going to have to decipher who is live? The answer is yes. Is it difficult to say in the middle of a game or a middle of a drive? Especially, hey, we're going to change up that 3 plays in. Number 1 was live, but now we're going to go to number 2. That's very difficult. So as the drive continues and you pick out who that was, then all of a sudden you're up 7-3 and you're going to run right, and they call run right. And now a guy just happens to bring a blitz from their left side and negates you when you have a lot of momentum. That's a competitive advantage.
It is.
That is very different. I just want everybody else to know why we're talking about that.
I get it. Schlegs, believe me, we're up against it. You did a great job breaking it down. Coming up, we'll dive into a little bit of Minnesota, talk about some of the other big games that happened. We'll get you caught up with everything right here on the Bobby Carpenter Show on the Big Play Network. Welcome back into the Bobby Carpenter Show. We've been breaking down the Michigan State game, talked a little bit of what happened in Penn State, Michigan, talked about the sign stealing stuff with Jim Harbaugh, Connor Stallions, and all that. And before we move any further, my man Schlegs, he wants to start talking about, Sharon Moore, the Michigan offensive coordinator, acting head coach for the Wolverines, tearing up in the post-game on the field interview, acting as if almost like Jim Harbaugh had been passed away, wrongfully incarcerated, wrongfully executed. I mean, all these different things. The man was just sitting in the hotel room, most likely watching the game. I don't think anybody's out to get Michigan more than what the evidence suggests and what should potentially happen. And the Big Ten acted swiftly, Schlegs, and he's out there dropping F-bombs and crying and bringing up Blake Corum, and they're hugging and loving. And I get it. It's your head coach, but holy smokes.
Yeah, I mean, like, go back to it, Bob. I mean, the suspension came down because he was conducting an impermissible in-person scouting operation over multiple years, resulting in an unfair competitive advantage that compromised the integrity of competition. That was the quote. All right. So now you have, Coach
Which
Moore.
No one has refuted, really. They just said he didn't know.
Right. So, I mean, Coach Moore came out, and I'm not going to judge anybody's emotion. I'm with you, Bob. I mean, I think it was a little bit over the top, but hey, you know what? When it means something to people, those emotions come out. I'm not going to say that, but here's why I want due process in this. Like, this is now drawing them all a little bit closer together.
That's
right.
Fine.
And that's what I'm saying. It's Ohio versus the world. It's Michigan versus everybody. And the problem is that, like, they're thinking it's Michigan versus everybody. It's just like, no, we just see that you did something wrong and we're just calling you out and you're not willing to accept that. So it's, listen, all I know that in 2 weeks is going to be an unbelievable matchup. Yeah. Get the popcorn ready because it is going to be 4 quarters of really physical football.
And the suspension, I thought, due process, Schlegs, is just letting all the facts be revealed.
That's it. That's
the
all.
Big Ten, Schlegs, the Big Ten has all the facts. The coaches and the administrations around the Big Ten are the one that's have been submitting them. The NCAA showed him everything. Tony Petitti has seen everything that he needs to see to be able to render a judgment here. So I think they picked the middle lane. You can't just say you shouldn't do it. I don't know if you needed to suspend him from the Big Ten championship game. I felt like this was kind of a middle road that they took. There's going to be far more stuff that happens in the offseason that we'll get to. But we got some of these other games that we didn't get to. Utah gave Washington all they could handle, was 35-28, had a chance to upset the Huskies on the road, fell just a little bit short there. Florida State gets challenged by Miami. Miami felt like there was a bad PI call late, or non-call. I mean, there's some opportunities there that they could have had. It was like a what ifs. Texas outlast TCU. TCU felt like had some chances. Like, it just felt like there's a number of games that could have went to the underdog that didn't.
Yeah, and I'll tell you this, one that did it, Georgia, Ole Miss.
Oh yeah.
Oh my
Beat down.
gosh, bro! Listen, I mean, again, number 2 versus number 9, and let me tell you what, Georgia's probably the number 1 team in the country. They've beaten 3 ranked opponents, and they absolutely destroyed Ole Miss 52-7. And I mean, it was like, oh, this is going to be a ball game, and then guess what? Very, very quickly, it was not a ball game.
Yeah.
And so, but that's why every single week, and we talked about, like, is Georgia really, are they really the number 1 team in the country? Are they really back to where they were when they won 2 national championships? Guess what, man? Every week it's hard to win. You got a brand new quarterback. You're figuring things out as you go. Ohio State looks significantly better right now than they did early in the year. Michigan actually just had their first ranked opponent of the entire season, and it was Penn State. But Georgia right now in that game versus 9 looks like the best team in the country. But to your point, Bob, these other teams that are ranked, every week it's hard to win in college football. And you know what? Hey, Texas, you play TCU at TCU, you barely escape. Those games that you mentioned, it's just tough, man.
It is tough. It's really hard. Ole Miss supposed to be good. Obviously, that game in Georgia, in Athens, that helped a little bit. But Georgia seemed to get up for every game this year that was of consequence. When it seems like when they were, sleepwalking through an opponent that wasn't going to challenge them, they looked a little lackadaisical. But when it was supposed to be a challenge, they have risen to the occasion. All right, this is the last tune-up against Minnesota. It's a 4 o'clock kick. I'm glad it's that. It's senior day. I didn't want the big noon. That's going to Maryland and Michigan before the final game up in Ann Arbor. They've got a stud receiver up there, Daniel Jackson. He's got over 100 yards 3 of the last 4 games. One of the fifth in yards in the Big Ten, 3rd in TDs. He's the guy that they really have to stop. Anything else you want to see in this final tune-up here in the final home game before the team up north?
I think you should play it accordingly. This is going to be a really emotional game, Bob. You and I have both been there on senior day. But it should really be exactly, you just saw the blueprint of what you need to do. You need to come out, because it's also a senior day, but it's also Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka's senior day too, because they ain't coming back. So,
Denzel Burke. I mean, there's a lot of guys.
Right, a lot of guys, man. So it's emotional for them. And so the blueprint is that play fast, play with your teammates, celebrate with your teammates, and let's put them out on top. Listen, does Minnesota scare you? They just got beat by Purdue. So they don't. But again, you still got to go out there and do your job, and you want to execute at a high level because you need this game to carry over for the one that you play next week. You don't want to be going back to the film, second guessing yourself as to where the fits are. What do you got to do? This is just another tune-up for the big one, for the game.
And I thought Minnesota would be a worthy adversary. It seemed Schlegs like earlier in the season, maybe a dark horse pick to win the West.
Well, they beat Iowa.
Good defense, can beat Iowa. They can score a little bit. And then they're losing to Purdue. It's like not even close. It's 49-30. What are we doing? What are we doing, Minnesota? So final game there. And man, like they're talking about the emotions for the guys. Like you stand there in the tunnel, like you look around, and I talk about this often with players. When you get to Ohio State, it seems like you're going to run out of that tunnel your first time 1,000 times. The years pass. Time will pass. The years will roll right out of Carmen, Ohio. And then all of a sudden you get to your senior year and you're like, man, it's rolling. The season, it's here. Boom, boom, boom. And you start looking at it. You're like, man, there's only 3 opportunities, 2 opportunities. And now it's the last one. Like, you'll come out of that tunnel. I'll walk down there. I go down pregame sometimes. I'll take my kids, and I never walk through the small park because I think that's reserved for players. But you're never going to walk down that tunnel with that purpose again, with the guys around you and the brotherhood, looking through the slit of your face mask. Maybe you have a visor on, whatever it is, and looking out there and seeing 105,000 people as you run to the north end of the stadium. Like it's a remarkable experience, and you're overwhelmed by it at the beginning. In the middle, you probably take it for granted, and then at the end, you're trying to soak it up and absorb it and realize how special that is. Because after that in that stadium, dude, the next time, like, you're putting on uniforms like me when I'm doing it for McAfee, it's freaking Halloween, dude. It's costume party. Like I'm not putting that on with a purpose anymore. Right. You know, Schlegs, it's like having a toy gun. Like I'm not going to hunt. I'm not going into war. Like I'm not putting these pads on to go do anything. I'm just wearing them around. They're simply for show. They're cosmetic. And so there's something ultimately special about that. Your parents are there, your friends and their parents are there. People are crying. And man, like you run through there, like you just breathe in that air because it's such a special event. And our senior year, we played Northwestern and they weren't great. And, we got curtain called at the end. And Fick and, they did something special. We're mad that they're taking us out. And Fick's like, just chill your butt out. They call it tonight. Like, we're going to call it and take you guys off the field. And, for the 85,000 people that were remaining, getting a standing ovation was pretty unbelievable, given, what you pour into that experience.
Yeah, to your point, Bob. I mean, we're the sum of our life's experiences. And guess what? When you play college football, just like you play in high school, there's a lot of people that invested time, energy, and effort with you, and they're all there celebrating this moment. We don't know if you're going to the league or not, right? But we're celebrating this
Doesn't
moment,
matter.
the culmination. Doesn't matter. The culmination of all the work that you put into it to be out there with your teammates. And then you have you soak that in. You got to embrace that, because you don't want to just bypass it, because you're absolutely right, Bob. I mean, there was just a lot of special things. And I remember coming off the field with the timeouts. That was very, very special, because people recognize the work that you put in. But then you also got to go out there and then lock in and play the game. And that's the funnest thing, because how many times do we get to do Purple Cobra or Top Gun high fives? Like, we don't get to do that. We might do that with a vanilla nut tap, right? But we're also in our 40s. So that's a little bit different than when you're going and you're making a sack on a quarterback from Northwestern. So it's just different, but I love watching it. Because you and I have experienced it. We also enjoy when the future Buckeyes and the present Buckeyes get to experience the things that we did.
Absolutely. Minnesota, I feel like this game should be a lot like Michigan State. They're better than the Spartans, but maybe not that much, not as much as I thought. I feel like at 49-10, 42-9, somewhere in there, maybe 13 games should be appropriate. And the biggest key for me, they came out of that game healthy.
Yeah.
On Saturday night. They need to come out healthy, refreshed, making sure that the guys that we talked about, Ransom, Eichenberg, Proctor, they're healthy and ready to go. All the guys who are playing are good. Cade's knee is feeling is good. Like, all those guys are locked in. That is what we need to see. And so hopefully that'll get it going. So we're going to take a quick break here. We're going to look ahead to some of the other big matchups around the world of college football, because, man, there's 2 weeks left. It is getting down, as they say in the business, Schlegs, the nut cutting time of who's going to be in to the CFP, who will make their conference championships. We'll talk about all that with the matchups of the week coming up next here on the Bobby Carpenter Show on the Big Play Network. All right, here's one of our favorite parts of the show, the weekly look ahead to some of the matchups that we're going to get a chance to see outside of Ohio State that could have an impact at some of the conference races around the country, the CFP race, all of that is out there. And taking a look, Washington Huskies, rather, excuse me, escaped last week, found a way to get a win against the Utah Utes. They're taking on Oregon State. And Oregon State's been a little bit up and down this year, but they've been pretty good. This one's in Corvallis. Washington only a 2-point favorite, which is kind of surprising given the fact that, they're the 5th ranked team, at least in the last CFP rankings in the country. Over under sitting at 61.5. Michael Penix Jr. looking pretty good. I feel like it's his Heisman to lose also at this point, Schlegs. And Oregon State, as of note, 4-0 in Corvallis this year.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Penix, I mean, you're absolutely right, Bob. I mean, we've seen their defense kind of struggle at times, but he's the one that's been able to carry the torch and pull these games out, because he's been playing at an extremely high level. And as we talk about like college football and NFL football, it's all about fits, and they're utilizing his talent and his arm strength, and they understand, how they're going to win games. And that's by putting the ball in Michael Penix Jr.'s hands. And he's been able to do that on a consistent basis. Again, you have a ranked opponent. I think now this is the 3rd one in a row that they have played. And so this is the test. We saw Notre Dame. They had to play 4 in a row. We got Georgia right now, right? We just talked about how they beat Ole Miss, and they got Tennessee coming up this week. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But again, they've played back-to-back ranked teams. So it's like, hey, man, in these type of games, like, you got to go execute week in and week out, especially as you get in November and getting into the conference championship games. Like, it's all going to be on his shoulders on the road in a ranked matchup. I can't wait to watch it.
And that's the 7:30 night game on ABC. So prime time, lights are out, fangs are out in Corvallis. Those Oregon State Beaver fangs, they'll be coming.
Beavers.
The Beaver Schlegs. I know you love yourself a nice beaver pelt. They're the best.
Gosh. I actually have a beaver. I have a beaver dam on our farm in the creek right now. It's amazing.
Have you ever seen the beavers out there?
I'm going to go scout them out. I'm going to go scout them. I've heard.
Are you allowed to hunt beaver? Are we allowed to do that?
I don't think so. I think you have to have a trapping permit. I will say though, they make a really big trail because they're getting all these like weeds and stuff and like building their dam with them and packing them in there. But it looks really nice.
What if you live in a trap house? Does that count as a trapping permit?
No, I don't know about that. Could be. You might have to be on the register or something for that.
We'll have Connor Stallions scout that out for us and figure
He
out
might
what
have
we need to
changed
do.
his name now to Connor Balboa. I don't know.
Connor Balboa, the Italian stallion.
You never know.
So you got a Lone Star state of mind. Texas surviving again.
Yep.
They're traveling to take on Iowa State, who looked rough to start the year. Picked up a little bit of steam. They're 6-4, but they're 5-2 in the conference. Still alive in that Big 12 championship race, which, Iowa State, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, and Oklahoma each have 2 conference losses. So an Iowa State win turns this thing into a jumbled mess. How do you like this one breaking out? And do the Cyclones have a chance?
Guys, listen, man. Big 12 is absolutely chaos because you have Oklahoma State in Bedlam beats Oklahoma, and then they go get dropped 40-something on them and lose to UCF. That's bumpy. Now, here's the thing with Texas. They've had some close games, but Jonathan Brooks, their number 1 running back, he has over 1,100 yards this year, 6th in the country in that, 10 touchdowns. He's out, torn his ACL. So he's no longer there. Yeah, that's bumpy. Again, at Iowa State, you're next man up mentality, right? So if you look at the grand scheme of like college football, right, you have Alabama, Georgia. What if Georgia loses to Alabama? Now you got a 1-loss Georgia and a 1-loss Alabama. You got the Pac-12 kind of cannibalizing themselves. Oregon, Washington potentially in their conference matchup. Big 12, Texas, do they beat somebody else or do they have a loss and they have 2? Then there's nobody going, and then you have, the Big 10 championship. And that's probably going to be Ohio State or Michigan versus Iowa, right? And so winner of that, I would pick those 2 to beat Iowa. But now you have Florida State down there being undefeated, who's really not going to play anybody until they play their conference championship game. Bumpy for the Big 12, bumpy for the Pac-12 as well.
It's bumpy. There's a lot there. So we're going to take another short break here. We might even dive in to a little bit of Tennessee and Georgia. Take another quick break here, but it's our favorite segment where we answer your questions with a little tailgate talk that you submitted. What do you want to know about the Buckeyes in college football? Well, we'll find out and we'll let you know what we think on the Bobby Carpenter Show right here on the Big Play Network. Welcome back into the Bobby Carpenter Show, and it's our favorite segment that we get to every week, Schlegs. It's the one where we answer your questions, what you want to know about the Buckeyes, about college football, anything out there, some of the stories, some of our little mischievous behaviors. Well, we'll get all that taken care of right here, Schlegs. So we got the first question coming to us from Jason Melman. Also, not a lot of talk about Minnesota in the postgame, a lot of talk about Michigan. Is that a product of reporters' questions, or do you think this team could be looking ahead? How hard is Day's job of keeping them focused on this week?
Yeah, hey, so real quick, just so you guys know, the best part about going at 10-0 is a chance to go 11-0. You still got to win the 1. That's why some people will say 1-0, right? So that's part of the reporters talking about Michigan and building that game up, along with all the controversy that is going on with the Michigan football program. That's why it was heavily those type of questions. However, as a coach, as a player, it's one game at a time. You can control what you can control. And the number 1 thing that you can control is going out there and playing a great game versus Minnesota, Bob.
Yeah, and so those are the questions, like you said. You try to answer them the way that you want, but we knew that everything was going to be about Michigan after that game.
Sure.
Just given the fact that they just beat Penn State, the stuff with the Harbaugh suspension, everything there. So Ryan Day was going to be just a barrage of questions were going to come his way. And so he's going to do the best he can. We're talking about this game that we just concluded, and we're going to talk about the game and our opponent this week against Minnesota. We'll get to Michigan when they come, but I don't think that it's an overwhelming issue. I'm sure some guys, in the locker room, you talk about that and this and that, but it's not like they're preparing for the Michigan game this week. They understand you need to beat Minnesota. Like that is the most important piece of this right now. So if you take care of business there, then you'll get a chance to take care of business against Michigan. So I'm not like overly concerned about it because I felt like just given the gravity of it, that's what everybody was talking about all around college football. So it wasn't just a situation of something that was going on here, with Ohio State and Columbus, Ohio. Heck, there are people probably getting questions about Michigan all across the country, in their post game. And obviously with the rivalry and the proximity and the Big Ten and everything, you knew those would be coming for Ohio State. Next question from our guy, James Robinson. Generally, tempo or regular speed best for this version of the OSU offense? I know context matters and may vary, but generally, what are your thoughts on that, Schlegs?
I think that tempo for Kyle McCord fits in his wheelhouse because he can go quick and they're calling, quick, short, intermediate passes. But he can still read the defense and progress. But to your point, there is context in this, and the faster you go, the less time you're on the field if you happen to go 3 and out, which then puts your defense back on the field faster. So there is a little bit of balance. And what I think Ryan has done this year of mixing in tempo when we get, a really big play and we have a personnel, we've caught them. We've caught the defense in a personnel that we don't want them to sub out of.
Yep.
That's where you can run tempo. And that's also the beauty of being able to run multiple packages with 11 personnel or what have you, right? Or even 21 personnel with 2 backs in, move a guy out as a wide receiver. Then we had 12 personnel with 2 tight ends and Gee Scott and Stover. We can do a lot of things, guys. And I think when you catch them in a defense that you like against the package that you have, that's when you see Ohio State start using the tempo, Bob.
Yeah, and it's key because I feel like they develop a rhythm. When you've watched Kyle McCord get going this year, tempo has been part of that.
The rhythm is going to get you, Bob.
But it's also a balance, and this is the problem. It's not just this offense, it's this team. Ryan Day's just not the head coach of the offense. He's the head coach of the team. Scoring points is part of winning games, but that's not the only part of winning games. And so when you have a defense that's really good, yeah, you can use some tempo and you can pick up and vary your speed. You want to be dynamic with that. But you also don't want to go out there and go 3 and out and burn 18 seconds off the clock. And then a defense that you've had that's been playing really well isn't getting rest and getting more exposure. Because the more you expose any great defense, the greater risk you have of them giving up big plays.
Yeah.
And so that's what I think Ryan's trying to balance here. Is like, okay, let's go fast a little bit. Once we get something going, we get some positive plays, we can do that. But I also want to make sure I'm controlling time of possession. I'm not necessarily trying to score, 49 points and a half like they did against Michigan State last year. We don't have to big play and chunk. I'd rather run the ball, bleed it a little bit, change speed. But like you said, Schlegs, you get in that 12 personnel, you get Gee Scott, you get Cade Stover out there. You can do a lot of different things formationally, remembering that, G used to be a wide receiver, so you can flex him, you can move him, you can get Trey out in routes. You could bring Chip Trainum in like they did, going a little, 2-back attack and what that can do. And you start being able to run and pass quickly. Well, that gets the defense on its heels. They can't sub. So you know what you're seeing. You're generally seeing a defense that's more vanilla. And also with that, your guys are getting fatigued. Their defense is getting worn down. But that means you got to be driving the football and having success with it. So we'll see. I think you want to use spot shots of that. But I don't know if you want to necessarily make a living with it. And so I think that how they balance that this week, and then obviously in the future with the Michigan game, we'll dive into that as well. Before we get out of here, this segment, one game that we didn't get to, the 3:30 CBS game in the SEC.
Yeah.
Georgia, as you mentioned, they didn't play anybody for a long time. Now they've been tested a number of times against some pretty good teams. They're going to Knoxville. They got Tennessee this week. They're 10-point favorites taking on the Volunteers. Your thoughts on where that game could go? Because this Georgia team seems to be picking up some speed.
Well, I think Beck's playing better. But again, you have Tennessee and you have Milton. I mean, right now Tennessee's, 7 and 3. But here's the deal: they're 9th in the country in rushing the football. And again, Georgia is a top 5 defense. So I mean, that's what this game's going to come down to, right? Milton has enough athletic ability to be able to beat you, but they're going to only be able to beat you if they can establish the running game. So that's really when you're watching this game, everybody, just watch Tennessee's rushing game versus Georgia's defense. That's what it is. Because if they're able to establish the run, then Milton will be able to use his athleticism and his arm to potentially score and beat you. That's really what it boils down to me, Bob.
Yeah, that's Tennessee. They haven't been this vertical passing team like they were last year. And, Milton needs a little bit of help. They need to have some success on the ground to be able to ultimately get it done. We'll see what that looks like. I'm not exactly sure. Yeah, I mean, they're going to have to – they do a good job with horizontal passing. They've been up and down this year. They've looked really good at points. Some games, you're like, is this even the same team? They're going to have to play really, really good football against Georgia if they want to have a chance to win. But that's another game to keep an eye on in that mid-window that'll be playing at the same time as Ohio State, because as we mentioned earlier, Ohio State will be taking on Minnesota at 4 o'clock, the big noon kick is going to be Michigan and Maryland, which I'm grateful for. It gives the parents time to get in there, senior day, relax a little bit. It's not a night game, so you still get to get out of there pretty early. And for the fans, you can sit in and hopefully see some nice night contests leading in to Thanksgiving week. All right, we're going to take one more break. Coming back, we're going to wrap up the show. We always got the best stories and the best stuff here on a Veterans Day weekend. There was a huge weekend across the nation for all of our soldiers that have served and are currently serving either at home or abroad. We thank you. We'll talk a little bit about that next. It's the Bobby Carpenter Show right here on the Big Play Network. All right, welcome back in for the final segment of the Bobby Carpenter Show. Covered a lot of ground. We've got Minnesota on the horizon. One more game left before we get to Thanksgiving week and the Michigan game. But some news across college football. Former Air Force linebacker and current Air Force Academy Superintendent Richard M. Clark has been named the next college football, the CFP Executive Director. Now, Schlegs, you are familiar with the Air Force Academy up there in Colorado Springs. Yeah. Is this the right guy to be leading us into the new expanded 12-team college football playoff era?
Yeah, so I mean, just so you guys know out there, it's be my little general when you got to think about what their rank is. So be, it's a 1-star, be my little general. He's a 3-star general, just so you guys know. Former Air Force Falcon linebacker. I think he graduated like 86 before my time there. And so is he the right guy? I don't know his track record as far as this, but I do know this. I mean, you got Air Force right now, 8-1. They got beat by Army, man, at home, which is terrible.
Schlegs, we just hyped them up. And then they went and ripped the bed, dude. They got smoked. It wasn't even close. I turned on the TV. They got highlights of the Black Knights just running down the field with no one around them.
Yeah, I think, what potentially he could bring is just a standard. I mean, anybody that's in the military, they have a standard. And as they judge, right, these teams and what we're looking at, is it week to week you're being consistent? And I think earlier on it was consistent. Ohio State had the 2 best wins in the country of Penn State and Notre Dame. But now you look at Georgia, they beat Kentucky, they beat Missouri, they beat Ole Miss. They're going to now be number 1. What are you looking at? What's the structure as to where we're making these decisions? And it's also important as we take in collectively that we're expanding to 12, because that now it's not just the top 4 and who gets a bye. It's everybody that makes it and what other conferences get to make it and where do they get seated. There's a lot of moving parts. And sometimes in those discussions, you need somebody in the room that can bring everybody together. And I think that could potentially be General Clark.
Absolutely. I love that. And then also, Schlegs, part and parcel with that, they've got Ted Carter Jr., the new president of Ohio State.
Yes.
I believe he was the superintendent of the Naval Academy prior. So a lot of influence here. And maybe, some guys running superintendent of one, superintendent of other couldn't hurt, obviously, to have that perspective and know about it. So I love this move. I love it. We're getting somebody from the academies involved. You start talking about the standard, Schlegs, of what it is and how you're going to operate. Those guys do it as well as anybody. Well, we got senior day coming up. That's exciting for the Bucks. It's going to be an emotional Saturday, 4 o'clock kick against Minnesota. Hopefully the weather is good this final one. And then it's on. Hopefully the Bucks will be 11-0 when we talk next time and have a chance, Schlegs, to go 12-0 against the University of Michigan with Jim Harbaugh, maybe on the sidelines, maybe not. Who knows? But thank you for tuning into this edition of the Bobby Carpenter Show right here on the Big Play Network.